The co-pilot's shaky voice sliced like a razor through the Boeing 777's loudspeakers, piercing the noise of the engines as the pilot inquired in horror, "Is there a pilot on board?" The black son of a famed captain was sleeping on the aircraft. David Thompson, seated in economy class in seat 28B, opened his eyes slowly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a critical medical emergency. The captain is unconscious. I need someone with commercial or military aviation experience immediately." After years of missions, where rest was a rare luxury, he had learnt to sleep any place at the age of 29, but his military instincts were immediately activated by something in that desperate tone. Businessman Jonathan Prescott, 3 rows ahead, chuckled bitterly as he adjusted his $8,000 Patek Philippe watch. As like anyone who was eligible was making the trip back there, he mumbled so loudly that half the cabin could hear him. He cast a scornful glance at David, who had his wavy hair pulled up in an inconspicuous bun, and was dressed in worn jeans and a simple t-shirt. Through the windows, the North Atlantic's wrath was visible as turbulence shook the plane severely. Panic was spreading like an unseen illness among the 287 passengers. Adults typed farewell messages, children sobbed, and some had even pleaded out loud, "Please." The co-pilot's voice broke through the loudspeakers once more. "If you have any flying training, please identify yourself right away. A category for storm has us flying blind, and I've never had to deal with this alone." David stood still, seeing the terrified looks on everyone's faces. Nobody thought he was a possibility. They saw him as simply another young black man on a solo trip, most likely coming from a menial job or seeing relatives. People had no idea that he was the son of an economy-level youngster. Like a peacock defending its territory, Jonathan sprung up suddenly and yelled, "Look here, young man!" towards the cockpit. "I've flown with him dozens of times in private jets. I can help. His brother-in-law is an executive pilot." A flight attendant rushed in, her face pallid. "We require a person with specialized military experience, sir. In these situations, civilian training is insufficient. Do you have any doubts about me?" Jonathan's chest continued to enlarge. Even in the face of pandemonium, she maintained her haughtiness. "I purchased these first-class tickets for $18,000. I am the plane's most experienced person." At that moment, David got up silently. In contrast to the other passengers' frantic, anxious agitation, his motions were precise and graceful. As he made his way to the cockpit down the aisle, while some viewed him with interest, others showed clear skepticism. He murmured, "Excuse me," to the flight attendant, whose serene tone stood in stark contrast to the commotion all around her. The following stillness was deafening. Lieutenant David Thompson, Air Force, 620 flight hours in F-35 Lightning II, specialist in navigation under extreme conditions. Jonathan Prescott's jaw dropped open in astonishment as he gazed at her. "Are you serious?" mumbled Jonathan. "A young man who can hardly afford an economy ticket wants us to think he's a pilot in the military." The flight attendant backed down though, because of something in David's eyes. There is a complete serenity that only those who have survived far more severe calamities can truly experience. Something that hinted at carefully guarded secrets and an unspoken power that was ready to be exposed. For what felt like a lifetime, David maintained eye contact with Jonathan. His man was ignorant of a great deal. The renowned Captain James Hawk Thompson, the first black pilot to command special rescue squadrons, was the father of the economy-class kid, but he was unaware of this. He was unaware that David had learnt to fly before learning to drive, and that he had been born just within a military installation. Above all, though, Jonathan was unaware that the most costly and humiliating lesson of his affluent life was about to be delivered. Finally, with a tone of almost tangible relief, the flight attendant, Mr. Thompson, spoke. "He owns the cabin. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this tale of justice and perseverance. You'll learn how a straightforward instance of prejudice may become the most powerful example of why we should never condemn someone based solely on their appearance or the class of seat they hold." Jonathan stood there as David made his way to the cabin, experiencing something he hadn't felt since he was a youngster and hadn't felt in decades. The agonizing and unavoidable sensation of being wholly, utterly mistaken about someone whose worth he had undervalued due to preconceived notions that now appeared to be not only unkind but dangerously foolish. In addition to his remarkable flying abilities, David Thompson left behind a personal legacy that would make every patronizing remark they had heard painfully ironic. Neither of them realized this yet. When that legacy was made public, it would permanently alter how everyone on that plane perceived bravery, skill, and what it meant to be a hero. The shrill, disagreeable sound of Jonathan Prescott's laughing reverberated around the cabin like shattered glass. He dramatically signaled to the other passengers, "Wait a minute," around her. David stayed still, his gaze focused on the horizon through the window, where lightning sped across the sky like silver veins. "Are you really going to believe this? This kid? Look at her." That disdain was not new. He had experienced the same uncertainty when he enrolled in the Air Force Academy at the age of 18. The same suspicion upon being the youngest pilot to become proficient in the F-35. Jonathan utterly disregarded. The flight attendants attempt to correct him, saying, "Mr. Prescott, please return to your seat." He went on, raising his voice a pitch. "My wife and I paid a fortune for these first-class seats precisely to avoid situations like this," he said. Other travelers started to whisper, "I'm not going to entrust my safety to someone who blatantly misrepresented her qualifications." Everyone could hear an elderly woman in first class whispering, "He appears very youthful. Does he actually qualify?" For a little moment, David closed his eyes and was unintentionally taken back to a recollection from 15 years ago. He saw his father get ready for another difficult mission while he was 14 years old. Waiting in the hangar at Nevada Air Base, a living legend was Captain James "Hawk" Thompson, the first pilot of black descent to lead special rescue units. In conflict zones, the guy who had saved 47 lives was thought to be impossible. That day, as the squad completed their preparations, his father had adjusted his helmet and said, "Son, life will provide you with two challenges. The first step is to demonstrate your competence. Since some individuals will never want to believe it, the second step is to repeatedly demonstrate it." "Dad, why?" young David had inquired, immediately sensing the significance of the statement. "Because they have come to terms with the fact that our skin color, not the wings of our aeroplanes, is what makes things impossible. Here's the trick though." James grinned. David could now identify that smile in his own image. Allow them to undervalue you. He utilizes the energy he spent doubting to become indisputable. The man who had given her the best counsel of her life was in enemy territory 2 weeks later. The rescue mission lasted 17 hours. Everyone said that Captain Thompson had passed away, but it was too late. However, David, who was still a teenager, helped the rescue squad navigate coordinates that a 14-year-old shouldn't have been able to figure out, analyzed weather patterns, and computed implausible trajectories. That night, they saved his father. You just did the impossible, kid. Never forget that when they tell you that it is impossible for you to do so, James Thompson stated, looking proudly at his son. "Can I be heard?" Jonathan rapped on the door of the cottage. "I insist on talking to the co-pilot. This is ridiculous. This aircraft cannot be taken over by this impersonator." The cabin door opened at that moment. Co-pilot Michael Chen emerged, his hand visibly shaking and his face white with fear. "The captain, Mr. Prescott, is experiencing seizures. The readings on her heart are vital. Now we need assistance." "Then allow me to assist." Jonathan's chest expanded up. "I've worked in executive aviation for 250 hours. Her first comment since Jonathan began his presentation was, "I've flown private jets all over Europe and in planes with autopilot and clear skies," David said quietly. "Not in a Boeing 777 with a pilot who is asleep and navigation systems that are impaired while flying through a Category 4 storm." Some people changed their minds because of the technical precision of what she said. Michael Chen gave her a hopeful glance. "What is the knowledge of a lieutenant in economic class regarding that?" "Like poison," Jonathan spat out the words. Jonathan took a step back when he noticed something in David's eyes for the first time as he turned slowly. It wasn't rage. Something far more unsettling was involved. A complete serenity that only those who have danced with death and forced it to recede may experience. David's voice was low but resonant with power, silencing the entire aircraft as she stated, "I know there are 3 types of pilots in the world: those who fly when it's easy, those who fly when it's difficult, and those who fly when it's impossible. Over the course of my career, I've saved 9 aircraft in situations that the manual stated were unrecoverable," he added, taking a step towards the cockpit before stopping. "However, it's not medals or flight hours that truly qualify me for this moment. What qualifies me," he added, "is that I am the only person on this plane that has ever flown through a war zone with a destroyed engine, a malfunctioning navigation system, and missiles being fired at my aircraft." The plane plunged violently, causing screams from a number of passengers. David didn't even brace himself, keeping his balance with the ease of someone born in the skies. Nevertheless, he returned home with his entire squadron. The silence that followed was broken only by the roar of the storm. "Liar," Jonathan muttered, but her voice had lost all conviction. "You can't prove any of that. You've probably memorized a few phrases from the internet." "And Michael," David turned to the co-pilot, ignoring Jonathan completely. "Tune to military emergency frequency 243.0 and identify our position to Andrews Air Force Base." The co-pilot hesitated for only a second before obeying. David's voice on the radio was different, firmer, laden with absolute military command. "This is Lieutenant David Thompson, callsign Hawk 2, reporting a civilian emergency, requesting confirmation of identity and authorization for unconventional procedures." The response came in seconds, clear through the cabin speakers. "Hawk 2, this is Commander Rodriguez, Andrews Military Air Traffic Control. We confirm her identity. Son of Captain James Thompson, callsign Hawk 1. Jonathan turned pale as if he had seen a ghost. "My God," someone whispered in first class. "He's the son of Falcon Thompson, the legendary Captain Thompson from Operation Desert Storm." "Falcon 2, the military voice continued. "The entire base is mobilized. What the hell are you doing on a commercial flight?" His father called 20 minutes ago, desperate, asking if we knew anything about you. For the first time, David smiled, a small, almost sad smile. His father always knew when something was wrong, even thousands of miles away. "Long story, Commander. We have a critical situation right now. Civilian commander, incapacitated, flying through an unforeseen storm system. I need authorization for combat maneuvers in a civilian aircraft." "Authorization granted. Falcon 2, you have top priority in all airspace on the East Coast. All airports have been notified. Medical teams are being directed to the nearest airport." David looked at Jonathan, who is now as white as a sheet. "Commander Rodriguez," David continued, "I request that you locate Captain James Thompson and inform him that his son is fine and that he paused, that sad smile spreading slightly, and that I finally understood the lessons she tried to teach me since I was a child. Understood, Falcon. 2. His father will be proud. Good luck up there." The cabin was silent, and everyone's eyes were on David, some with deep shame, some with growing admiration. Dr. Patricia Lee, a female voice, emerged from first class, and a woman of about 50 years stood up. "I'm the chief neurosurgeon at Johns Hopkins Hospital. I worked for 5 years in military hospitals treating wounded pilots. I can help with the commander." David nodded respectfully. It would be an honor to have her with us. Dr. Jonathan watched this exchange. Finally realizing the seriousness of his error, he had attempted to disqualify not just a qualified pilot, but the son of a military legend, someone who had literally grown up around fighter planes and learnt to fly before he learnt to drive. "Prescott," David turned to him one last time before entering the cockpit. His voice was calm, but there was something in it that made Jonathan feel as if the ground were disappearing beneath his feet. "When we land, and we will land, perhaps she'll reflect on how an economical class kid who doesn't belong here saved his life, her wife's, and everyone else's on this plane." He paused, then added something that would cause Jonathan to wake up in a cold sweat for months to come. My father always said that privilege buys first-class seats, but competence is what keeps the plane in the air. Today, you're going to learn the difference. As David disappeared into the cabin with Dr. Lee, the passengers fell silent. Some began to understand that they had witnessed something much greater than a simple air emergency. They had seen the living manifestation of how prejudice and privilege collide with real competence, and Jonathan Prescott, for the first time in her privileged life, felt something she had never experienced before. The absolute terror of realizing that she had seriously underestimated someone based purely on appearance and social class. Someone who now literally held her life in her hands. What none of us knew yet was that David Thompson carried with him not only the legacy of one of the greatest pilots in American military history, but also secrets of flying techniques developed on classified missions that even his superiors did not fully know. Techniques that in the next few minutes would transform an impending disaster into the most impossible flight demonstration civil aviation had ever witnessed. And when the true extent of his abilities was revealed, Jonathan Prescott would discover that he had made not only a devastating moral error, but possibly the greatest error in judgment of his entire existence, a mistake that, even if they survived that flight, would haunt him for the rest of his days. Every prejudiced word that had come out of his privileged mouth was about to turn into the most bitter and unforgettable irony of her life, because sometimes the universe has a peculiar way of teaching lessons that all the money in the world can't buy, and some of those lessons are learned at 40,000 feet, where there is no place for lies, empty privileges, or judgments based on the color of the skin of the person saving her life. Inside the cockpit, David faced a scenario that would send any commercial pilot into a full-blown panic. Captain Mitchell was convulsing violently, foam coming out of his mouth as the heart monitors sounded deafening alarms. "First aid, now," David ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos like a sharp blade. She checked the captain's vital signs with the precision of someone who had treated wounded pilots in combat zones. "We have approximately 12 minutes before he goes into complete cardiac arrest." Michael Chen watched him, impressed by the economy and precision of his movements. "Lieutenant, how do you know so much about emergency medicine?" 10 years flying rescue missions in hostile territory, David replied, adjusting the navigation instruments while simultaneously monitoring the captain's vital signs. "When you're the only person between a wounded soldier and death, you learn a few things." Dr. Patricia Lee entered the cabin with the confidence of someone who had spent years in military hospitals. "Let me take over the patient. You focus on keeping us alive." David nodded respectfully. Two minds trained for extreme situations recognized each other instantly. Meanwhile, in the cabin, Jonathan had convinced half of first class that they were all doomed because of an imposter at the controls. "Did you see how he was dressed? Qualified people don't travel like that," he muttered, to anyone who would listen. Her Victoria finally confronted him. "Richard, stop it. You're being ridiculous." "Ridiculous." He turned indignantly. "I'm trying to save our lives. I'm not going to leave our safety in the hands of someone who..." David's voice interrupted over the intercom, taking full command. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Lieutenant Thompson. I will be taking command of this aircraft until we reach our destination. Please remain calm and follow all instructions from the crew." The authority in his voice was undeniable. It wasn't the tone of someone trying to persuade. It was that of someone who was used to being obeyed without question. In the cockpit, David had transformed Michael from a paralyzed co-pilot into an efficient assistant. "Michael, I need you to monitor our fuel and pressurization systems. I'm going to get us out of this storm, but I need accurate information every 30 seconds. "Yes, sir," Michael replied, her confidence returning for the first time since the emergency began. Then David did something that left Michael perplexed. Instead of following standard emergency routes, he began mentally calculating an impossible trajectory, flying through the storm instead of around it. "Lieutenant, with all due respect, this goes against all safety protocols," Michael protested. David smiled for the first time. In 2019, he was leading a rescue mission in Afghanistan when they were hit by Surfacado air missiles. 2 engines failed, navigation destroyed, sandstorm zeroed visibility. She continued flying as she spoke, her hands dancing over the controls with mesmerizing fluidity. The manual said to eject and abandon the mission, but there were 15 wounded soldiers depending on us. So I did exactly what I'm doing now. I threw the manual out the window and trusted her experience. And what happened? I brought everyone home. All 15 of them. The words carried a weight that made Michael realize he was in the presence of someone truly exceptional. That's when the cabin door burst open. Jonathan had managed to convince a flight attendant to let him through. "This is complete madness," he declared, observing David's unconventional calculations. "You're putting everyone in danger. I demand to speak to air traffic control immediately." David didn't even turn around. "Mr. Prescott, this cockpit is no place for tourists. Return to his seat." "Tourist?" Jonathan's voice rose an octave. "I've flown in more private jets than Commander Rodriguez," David called over the radio. "Request location of Captain James Thompson, and inform him that his son has finally understood the lesson he tried to teach him since childhood." The reply echoed through the cabin. "Understood, Falcon. 2. Your father will be proud." The silence that followed was absolute. Jonathan turned pale as if he had seen a ghost. "Michael, when we touch down, you'll understand why they call me Falcon." 2, David said, that smile touching his lips again. In the next few minutes, Jonathan would witness something that would completely redefine his understanding of competence, leadership, and heroism. And he would discover that he had underestimated not only an exceptional pilot, but the heir to a legacy that would transform that flight into the most impossible display of skill that civil aviation had ever witnessed. What no one knew yet was that David carried secret techniques developed in classified missions. Knowledge that even his superiors did not fully understand, and when the true extent of his abilities was revealed, every prejudiced word Jonathan had uttered would become the bitterest irony of her privileged existence. "Commander Rodriguez," David's voice echoed over the radio with absolute authority. "I request authorization for Phoenix maneuver in a civilian aircraft. I repeat, Phoenix in a Boeing 777. The silence on the other end lasted 3 eternal seconds. "Falcon to confirm. Are you requesting authorization for a classified maneuver in a commercial flight with civilians on board?" Jonathan felt her legs wobble. Classified maneuver. Did that economical-class kid have access to secret military techniques? "Affirmative, Commander. It's our only chance. The storm is creating downdrafts that will destroy any conventional approach." Michael watched David's calculations with growing disbelief. "Lieutenant, that's physically impossible for an aircraft of this size." David smiled. That smile his father always had before executing the impossible. Impossible is a word that only exists in the vocabulary of those who have never had to save lives. Michael authorization granted. "Falcon 2, Rodriguez finally replied. "God help you. Andrews Air Force Base is transmitting everything to the Pentagon. General Hayes and Hayes' father are watching in real time." For the first time since taking command, David felt an emotion pierce her professional calm. His father was watching. The legendary Captain James Thompson would see his son perform the maneuver he himself had developed during Operation Desert Storm. "Jonathan," Dr. Lee called from the back of the cabin. "I suggest you leave now, or hold on to something very sturdy." But Jonathan was paralyzed watching David transform a Boeing 777 into something that defied all the laws of commercial physics. Her hands danced over the controls with surgical precision. Every movement economical perfect Phoenix maneuver initiating in 30 seconds, David announced over the intercom. "Crew brace for unusual duty." Passengers remained seated with seatbelts fastened. In the passenger cabin, Victoria Prescott watched her husband turn white as a sheet. "Richard, what's going on?" He has authorization from the Pentagon to do something that shouldn't even be possible," Jonathan whispered. Her arrogance finally shattered by the magnitude of her mistake. The plane began a controlled spiral descent that made all the passengers scream. But it wasn't a fall. It was a precise dance through air currents that David visualized three-dimensionally, as if he could see the invisible. "My God," Michael murmured, watching the instruments. "You're using the storm's downdrafts for propulsion. That's brilliant." A technique developed by his father in 1991, David replied calmly as he made millimeter adjustments. He saved 23 soldiers in Baghdad by doing exactly that. It was never officially documented because the Pentagon considered it top secret. Jonathan felt the world spinning. It wasn't just a competent pilot he had underestimated. It was his son, and heir to a military legend, performing maneuvers that would likely be studied in militaries for generations. Andrews Air Force Base, David continued, with supernatural calm. "I request that you record everything when we land. This technique needs to be incorporated into civilian emergency manuals. I've saved too many lives with it to keep it a military secret." "Understood, Falcon 2. Recording authorized." His father says he's proud of him. For the first time, David's voice trembled imperceptibly. "Tell her that I finally understand. The best revenge against those who underestimate her is not to prove them wrong. It's to save her life anyway." The plane passed through the last layer of turbulence and emerged below the storm, the dew runway appearing like a miracle through the rain. "Landing gear down," Michael announced, his voice thick with awe. "Final approach, in my God, we're 30% below ideal speed and still completely stable. How is that possible?" "Applied physics and 17 years of flying in situations that would kill any ordinary pilot," David replied, executing the smoothest touchdown the Boeing 777 had ever experienced. The plane landed like a feather. Applause echoed through the cabin as ambulances and fire trucks surrounded the aircraft. Jonathan sat trembling, watching the entire military operation through the window. At least 50 emergency vehicles, medical teams, and at the end of the runway, a military car with a lone figure emerging. Even from a distance, Jonathan recognized the posture. It was Captain James Thompson himself coming to receive his son. The passengers gave David a thunderous applause when he eventually exited the cabin. But he ignored them all, looking for only one person. Jonathan attempted to hide, but it was too late. David halted directly in front of that. "Mister, when you wake up tomorrow and read about this in the press, when your recordings of your attempts to stop the sole competent pilot on this plane from saving her life go viral on social media, I hope you think about one thing, Prescott," he stated gently. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy. "Privilege buys first-class seats. Competence keeps the plane in the air. My father taught me that, but you just learnt it in the most humiliating way possible." Victoria moved away from her husband, whispering, "You almost killed us all because of prejudice." But the final blow came from an unexpected place. Michael, the co-pilot, had recorded everything on the cockpit camera, standard procedure in emergencies. And since the transmission was being made in real time to the authorities, it was already on military servers. Mr. Prescott, the security officer, approached. "We will need his statement regarding interference with emergency operations." The recordings demonstrate an effort to keep the qualified pilot from assuming command in an emergency. Jonathan polled when he understood. It wasn't just social humiliation. There were real legal consequences. As he was escorted to a separate room, he saw David through the window being embraced by an older man in military uniform. The legendary Captain Thompson and his son reunited after David saved 287 lives, using techniques that only he and her in the world knew completely. What Jonathan didn't know yet was that those recordings would not remain confidential. In 48 hours, they would be everywhere. And her privileged life built on arrogance and prejudice was about to crumble in ways even his worst nightmare could not have predicted. Because sometimes, the universe has a peculiar way of teaching that humiliating someone based on appearance is not only morally wrong, it can be the most devastatingly stupid decision a person can make. Especially when that someone is literally the only thing standing between him and a terrible death. 6 months later, David Thompson was promoted to captain in a ceremony at the Pentagon, becoming the youngest pilot to receive the Air Medal of Honor. Her Phoenix technique was incorporated into emergency manuals worldwide, saving dozens of subsequent lives. Jonathan Prescott faced the brutal reality of his choices. The viral video of his prejudiced comments had 80 million views. Her company lost 90% of its customers in weeks, forcing complete bankruptcy. Victoria filed for divorce, taking full custody of their children. "Daddy, why do people hate you so much?" asked her daughter, destroying what remained of his pride. Now a salesman at a used car dealership, Jonathan saw giant billboards with David in uniform every day. Competence has no color, it has character. 3 years later, they crossed paths at the airport. David wore a brigadier general's uniform, surrounded by assistants. Jonathan wore the dealership's blue uniform, carrying a cheap suitcase. "General Thompson," Jonathan murmured, "I would like to apologize properly." David studied him briefly. "Mr. Prescott, you gave me the greatest gift possible that day. You reminded me why I do what I do. I lost everything because of prejudice." Jonathan confessed. "No, sir." David corrected him gently. "You discovered that you never had anything real. Privilege is not achievement. Respect is not inherited." As David walked away, Jonathan understood the most bitter lesson. True revenge wasn't destroying him. It was building a legacy so brilliant that it made her pettiness irrelevant. Have you ever underestimated someone and then realized you made the biggest mistake of your life? Leave her story in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more stories. Proving that greatness doesn't ask permission to shine.